Ukraine's President Volodymyr Zelenskyy and 4 other European leaders have just held a phone call with US President Donald Trump, and they're calling for a full and unconditional 30-day ceasefire with Russia starting on Monday. That's according to Ukraine's foreign minister, who described the phone call as fruitful. The leaders of Germany, Poland, France and the UK arrived in Kyiv earlier on Saturday. They're part of the so-called Coalition of the Willing, which aims to pave the way for lasting peace in Ukraine. Let's bring in DW correspondent Rebecca Ritters in Kyiv. Rebecca, this is the first joint visit of these European leaders to Kyiv. Can you tell us more about this phone call that they had with Donald Trump?
Unfortunately, that's pretty much what we know at the moment, Tommy. There was a press conference following that phone call. That information from the press conference has been embargoed for another half an hour or so. So we'll be definitely hearing more of what was said inside that press conference by the 4 leaders and President Zelenskyy in a little while. But that is certainly what we know so far. That Ukraine's Foreign Minister Andrei Sybiha has tweeted this picture, supposedly these men around a phone, supposedly on the phone to President Donald Trump of the United States. He said that it was a very fruitful call, and as you've just reported, they are all now pushing for this 30-day non-negotiable ceasefire that would begin on Monday. That is something that apparently all of these allies have agreed to, according to that tweet. As I say, the information that came from that press conference, though, is still embargoed. So, and that would be a huge, huge piece of information to come out of this press fight. Certainly the first time something like this has been attempted, though it doesn't seem that. Obviously, we'll have to wait and see what happens, what Vladimir Putin says, what will the Russians agree to. But it certainly, from what we've been hearing in the lead up to this talk and lead up to today's visit, is not something that the Russians are going to stick to.
And the visit itself, a major trip by these 4 leaders. What's it like in Kyiv? I mean, you've been out gauging the mood, particularly with the surprise we've seen that all of them showing up at the same time today.
Yeah, it's the first time that Friedrich Merz, the German Chancellor, has come in in the position of Chancellor. And it's the first time in 2 years that President Emmanuel Macron has come. I was here last time. Security was also very tight then, as it is for all these high-level meetings. But I've been out and about in the streets today, and I think it's safe to say that the security for today's visit is even tighter. Of course, we saw all those leaders and President Zelenskyy making that walk across the Maidan to lay flowers at the memorial there. So, that is obviously, having all of these leaders out and about on the streets has made security incredibly tight. Now, it's believed that the leaders are going to stay for a couple more hours, that they won't be leaving until the evening. And so a lot of the central parts of the city are, if not completely shut down, then certainly restricted. There are a lot of security out on the street and people being diverted. No one's allowed to park cars. We've seen people sweeping for bomb sweepers and things like that. So definitely a huge security presence here for this high-level meeting, and hoping that everything, goes ahead safely.
And it's indeed a strong symbol of support, as we've seen through the war, really. So how do these leaders, together with Ukraine, get Russia on board for a possible ceasefire?
Well, that is the question that nobody, certainly I, cannot answer at the moment. I mean, this is something that they have been pushing. It's certainly a show of unity from the Europeans, from the European Union and the allies, also from the United States, which, this is coming at a time that since Donald Trump has taken office, the United States support for Ukraine has wavered at times. Of course, we've seen it sort of firming up a little bit more in recent days and weeks with that talk, the private talk between Donald Trump and President Zelenskyy that was very public, in fact, at the Pope's funeral just a little while ago. So, the sort of relationship looking to be warming up a little bit there. And that's certainly what these European leaders are trying to maintain. You've seen it there with that call. They're trying to keep the relationship between the Europeans, the US and Ukraine incredibly tight. And, they're hoping that they'll see the fruits of that relationship or I should say, that relationship bear some fruit after these talks. However, President Putin of Russia has certainly been saying all along that he's not going to agree to this 30-day ceasefire. That the Russians aren't in a position where they're going to have to come to the table without some of the demands that they're asking for. And we heard the Russian spokesperson Dmitry Peskov speak even today, saying that again that they're not going to even consider a ceasefire so long as the Western allies keep sending arms to Ukraine. So just seeing how they're going to bridge that gap, it seems a long way off at this stage.
Okay, DW correspondent Rebecca Ritters in Kyiv. Appreciate you bringing us up to speed. Thank you. Let's continue the conversation here in studio with DW's chief political editor, Michaela Küfner. Thanks for joining us here. Michaela, I guess considering the timing, these leaders would have been waiting for Germany to have a new chancellor in terms of Merz joining them and then having this big visit.
Yes, it's about Germany being able to actually take decisions and take a lead. That's what Friedrich Merz, who was just elected as Chancellor, although it was a bumpy road this last Tuesday, has vowed to do, that he would make Germany count again, that Germany would not be that indecisive factor. And the former Chancellor, Olaf Scholz, was indeed perceived to be hesitant over ruling out sending longer-range missiles. And the debate got very much focused on this very German tower system. So I think it would be very interesting whether that got raised today. But this system would not be a game changer. The real game changer could potentially here be to expose Russia, Moscow, the Russian president, as the one who doesn't want peace. Because this is also a fight over the narrative, particularly in Russia, where Vladimir Putin still claims that Ukraine started the war. And what we're seeing today is an emboldened Germany, a Germany that has a lot of money it can potentially spend. It has changed its debt rules, so theoretically the sky is the limit on defence spending. And now European partners, including Britain, which left the European Union, making a highly symbolic stance, standing at the side of Volodymyr Zelenskyy, but at the same time calling that ally that they all need around the table, US President Donald Trump, to make sure he won't kill whatever symbolism, whatever proposal there is with his next X post or Signal post or Truth Social post. So this is so far very highly choreographed symbolism, and we're all waiting with bated breath whether truly a 30-day truce can come out of this today.
Let's discuss the German angle a bit further. What practically do we expect Friedrich Merz to bring that would be, as you say, remarkably different from what we had under the previous leadership?
Well, depending on where you stand, he will either be seen as more decisive or more of a risk taker. And it's very difficult to be completely neutral on that. And his supporters will see him as a breath of fresh air, of someone who's now willing to put Germany in the lead, which it already is in terms of financial and defence support for Ukraine. Germany is the second largest supporter right after the United States. There's no change in his assessment to the assessment of the previous Chancellor that Germany, that Europe would not be able to support Ukraine alone if the United States completely pulls out. But what he advocated before his election was to change the dynamics, to actually tell Vladimir Putin, listen, if you keep targeting civilian targets, the infrastructure, then we will deliver that particular weapon towers. We haven't heard him say that since he became Chancellor, so he's treading more carefully there, but he's much more willing to really call Vladimir Putin's bluff. And this is what we're seeing in the making here today. And clearly, visibly, European leaders are relieved to finally have Germany back again to talk. Let's just remind ourselves, at the funeral of the late Pope Francis, the Germans were literally not in the picture when Volodymyr Zelenskyy, Ukraine's president, sat down with Donald Trump. It was up to Emmanuel Macron and Keir Starmer, really, to hold the fort.
I mean, it's only been a few days since Merz became Chancellor. Is anything we have seen so far that we can read into?
Well, he's very vocal about his resolve that he wants to change these dynamics around, actually across the board, also in terms of trade policy and how he deals with key allies. He first went to Paris, which the German Chancellor always does, but he also went to Warsaw to show that he stands at the side of Poland, which is on the eastern flank of NATO, which bears the brunt also of the hybrid war that Poland is particularly experiencing through migrants being pushed across the border. At the same time, Germany tightened its own borders, something the Poles really didn't appreciate at all. Despite these differences, both leaders demonstrated that Europe is willing to act on Ukraine. But what that actually means in terms of what Germany is willing to spend, what Friedrich Merz is willing to spend for the greater good in Europe that doesn't benefit the German defence industry, we do not know yet. And also there is always that one big factor that can change the dynamics within a second, which is US President Donald Trump. There's no deflecting from the truth, the underlying truth that it's the Americans who continue to guarantee security here in Europe. And these leaders are now tasked with changing that.
Okay. We'll leave it there for now. DW's Chief Political Editor, Michaela Küfner. Thank you.
You're welcome.
We're returning to the Ukraine story where President Zelenskyy has been meeting with the leaders of France, Germany, Poland and the UK. Let's listen in.
Of the Republic of Poland, Donald Tusk.
But also the ability to defend infrastructure, energy systems, transport, financial institutions. We must leave no weak spots so that Russia feels it has to play by the rules. Thank you for your support, dear friends. Now I give floor to the co-chairs of the coalition of the villains, the Prime Ministers of the United Kingdom, and then President of France, then Chancellor of our strategic partner Germany, and then Prime Minister of Poland, Donald Tusk. So please, here.
Volodymyr, thank you. And it's really good that we are hosting this meeting of the Coalition of the Willing from Kyiv. It is a very important symbolic meeting showing the strength of our unity. And it's timely because this awful conflict's been going on now for over 3 years. And this week we have been celebrating 80 years since the end of the Second World War. The E-Day has been celebrated across Europe. And what that war was about were the values of freedom and democracy and the right of countries to make their own decisions, their sovereign right to do so. Those are the same values that we're addressing here today. And so it is timely, it is important, and I pay tribute to the courage and resilience of the Ukrainians that have fought this conflict for 3 long years. It is an important moment because, as Volodymyr has just said, there is this ceasefire for 30 days proposal that is very clearly now on the table. Volodymyr, I think you first, with courage, put forward this proposal probably 2 months ago now as the way forward. Emmanuel and I have been discussing it intensively, including this week, and pushing the case for 30 days. Other allies in Europe have joined that, and of course the US position is now absolutely clear. So we have unity in relation to the proposal for a 30-day unconditional ceasefire. That is a really important moment in this conflict that we should focus on in this meeting of the Coalition of the Willing, and remind ourselves that only one country started this illegal conflict, and that was Russia and Putin, and only one country stands in the way of resolving this peacefully, and that is Russia and Putin. And Volodymyr and the Ukrainian people, we stood with you in resisting Putin's aggression, and we must now stand with you in the fight for peace. Putin has, in the last few hours, sought to put conditions on a ceasefire. It's really important that we make clear an unconditional ceasefire is a ceasefire without conditions, and we reject the imposition of conditions, and we need to be really clear about that. It is for Russia, it's for Putin to come to the table for a 30-day unconditional ceasefire, and there must be clear sanctions if he fails to do so. There is real unity on that. We need to be clear that that is one of the main outcomes we want from this meeting of the Coalition of Willing here this morning. Volodymyr, you have our support in the fight that you have. You have our support in the fight for peace as we go forward. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Please.
Thank you, Volodymyr. Thank you for hosting this meeting, and I'm very happy to be here with Keir, Friedrich, and Donald alongside with you. And I want to thank our colleagues.
Thank the teams of the leaders and all those present here who are personally working and in constant touch with the United States of America. The partners are in permanent communication with Washington. We've just spoken together with the President Trump, and we have agreed our joint view, our further steps. A full and unconditional ceasefire is much needed. The accountability for refusal is needed. We can together lay the foundation for peace, and I thank everybody who supports the dignified end to this war. Once again, I thank President Macron, thank you, Keir, thank you, Friedrich, thank you, Donald, and all our partners who were together with us online today. Glory to Ukraine.
Заява президента Французької Республіки Еммануеля Макрона.
Statement by the President of France, Emmanuel Macron.
Thank you, Mr. President. Dear Volodymyr, for hosting us. I can tell that you're hosting us together with the Chancellor, the Prime Minister, and myself. We are very pleased to stand by you and to stand by the Ukrainian people today, because Ukraine is fighting for its sovereignty, its independence, but today Ukraine is the beating heart of Europe, Europe that believes in freedom and peace. On the 8th of May, we celebrated together the end of the Second World War, the victory, and indeed Europe celebrated the 18th anniversary, and over the past few months we commemorated, and you attended the celebrations of D-Day, the landings in Normandy, and the values that enabled us to get together. And we stand here today in Kyiv because this is where the freedom and the security of Europe are at stake. And the camp of peace is today here, whereas the camp of war is in Moscow. About 10 years ago, Moscow that decided to invade Crimea, and 3 years ago to attack Ukraine. So the future of our principles, but as well of our collective security, is at stake. The future of the European defense and the principles on which our continent and more generally the international order is based. This is the reason why we decided to support Ukraine in its war of resistance. We stand united to obtain a robust and sustainable, durable peace. And such is the purpose of the initiatives that we've been taking together over the past few months. Like the President said, over the past few weeks, we've been working on what is now a major step. The United States of America proposed a ceasefire. We wanted to add to it some work towards robust and sustainable peace with the reassurance force, negotiations during the ceasefire. An unconditional ceasefire was agreed for 30 days in Jeddah, agreed by President Zelenskyy. And 2 days ago, President Trump reiterated his willingness to enforce an unconditional 30-day ceasefire. I quote his words. Now, together with some 20 countries, member of the Coalition of the Willing, we decided to support a ceasefire as from Monday without any precondition for this ceasefire, neither on the Ukrainian nor on the Russian side. It is meant to last for 30 days, at sea, on land and in the air, being monitored mainly by the United States of America, and all the Europeans that stand ready can contribute. And that will enable to launch immediately the work, the negotiations, to build a robust and lasting peace, talking about the sensitive infrastructure, the territory, and of course the security guarantees. In case of violations of this ceasefire, we agreed that massive sanctions would be prepared and coordinated amongst the Europeans and with the United States. We, a few minutes ago, at the end of the meeting of the Coalition of the Willing, we talked to President Trump, first of all, to report on our work, also to thank him for the initiative that he took a few months ago already, and to agree on all the relevant terms, as is the case. In addition to the ceasefire, to work on robust and lasting peace, we will continue to provide our military and financial support to Ukraine for it to resist. And most importantly, we will continue to act for Ukraine to enjoy some robust guarantees with equipment to deter any new attack, with financing and adequate financing and adequate equipment. We will also work on second curtain reassurance forces. We discussed this with all of the heads of state and government that joined us on the occasion of this remote conference of the Coalition of the Willing. We'll continue to work on that, and hopefully, as from Monday, that will be our concrete framework for the discussions that will involve all the stakeholders around the table. When the time comes, we will also work on reconstruction, which is, of course, of the utmost importance. In any case, by standing by you, being with you here today, Mr. President, dear Volodymyr, we're not here just to continue commemorating, but also to say, to affirm that on this 10th of May we stand fully by your side, to tell once again to the Ukrainian people that we will never abandon it, and that we will fight for peace. And I hope that peace will begin as from Monday, based on the terms that we proposed, that we support, and which today are agreed upon by the United States of America, all of the European allies, Ukraine, of course, as well as Canada, Australia, Norway, and others who are part of this coalition for the willing. It is now time for us to build this peace and a lasting peace. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Volodymyr. Friends, it's a real pleasure to be here in Kyiv with you all, with Emmanuel, with Friedrich, and with Donald. This is Europe stepping up, showing our solidarity with Ukraine, and also showing during this week, when we mark 80th anniversary of VE Day, that we understand the lessons of history. The lesson that any veteran of Normandy, of North Africa, or any other campaign will tell you, but that Putin has not yet grasped. There's no glory in aggression and conquest. Glory comes from fighting for your country, defending your people, and winning the peace. And that is the message of this moment. Volodymyr, we stand with you to secure the just and lasting peace that Ukraine deserves. It's almost 2 months now since you agreed to an immediate 30-day ceasefire. In that time, Russia has launched some of the most deadly attacks on civilians of the entire war, including here in Kyiv. Normal lives, homes, families destroyed. This is what Russia offers in place of peace, along with delays, smokescreens, like the current 72-hour ceasefire. And so all of us here, together with the US, are calling Putin out. If he's serious about peace, then he has a chance to show it now by extending the VE-Day pause into a full, unconditional 30-day ceasefire, with negotiations to follow immediately once a ceasefire is agreed. No more ifs and buts, no more conditions and delays. Putin didn't need conditions when he wanted a ceasefire to have a parade, and he doesn't need them now. Ukraine has shown the willingness to engage again and again, but again and again, Putin has refused. So we are clear, all 5 leaders here, all the leaders on the meeting we just had with the Coalition of the Willing, an unconditional ceasefire, rejecting Putin's conditions, and clear that if he turns his back on peace, we will respond, working with President Trump, with all our partners. We will ramp up sanctions and increase our military aid for Ukraine's defence to pressure Russia back to the table. And that's what we've been discussing today, as well as securing Ukraine's future for the longer term, convening the latest meeting of the Coalition of the Willing, with partners joining virtually from around Europe and across the world, lining up to support Ukraine's future strength and security, discussing operational plans and making concrete commitments of support across land, air and sea. We want to help Ukraine look to the future with confidence. So we're working to boost Ukraine's economy, and as a vital step, I'm pleased that UK experts have been on the ground leading work to support the resumption of flights into Ukraine once a ceasefire is achieved. It will take time, but this will be a huge moment in reconnecting Ukraine's economy, boosting investor confidence, and helping to reunite families separated by this war. Ukraine secure and thriving. That is what we all want to see. With our 100-year partnership, the critical minerals deal with the US, and our Coalition of the Willing, we are building the framework for peace in Ukraine, to support a better future for the Ukrainian people, and to pledge once again, in all our interests, and on this anniversary, that aggression will never prevail on our continent. Thank you.
Заява федерального канцлера Німеччини Фрідриха Мерца.
Statement by Federal Chancellor of Germany Friedrich Merz.
President Zelenskyy, lieber Volodymyr, liebe Kollegen, Emmanuel Macron.
Volodymyr, colleagues, Emmanuel Macron, Keir Starmer, Donald Tusk, ladies and gentlemen. This week that has now come to an end, we met at different places in the world. We commemorated the end of the Second World War. In different places, a war that was started by Germany, my country, only a few years after the end of the Second World War, and not least, thanks to the United States of America, France, the UK, and many others, was given the opportunity to come back to the circle of civilized nations. This wonderful opportunity Germany was given is an obligation to us today, an obligation to stand up for peace across the globe, for freedom across the globe, and serve peace worldwide. I personally, at the end of this week, I'm also very moved that as Federal Chancellor of the Federal Republic of Germany, I am allowed to stand here with you in this circle and together with the Polish Prime Minister, the British Prime Minister, and the French President, and the Polish Prime Minister, to stand with our friend and partner, Volodymyr Zelenskyy, President of Ukraine, and not only express our full solidarity and support, but also in this very difficult situation of a war that has been going on for more than 3 years, on an almost historic day to say we stand firmly by the side of Ukraine, and we will continue to do so. We know about the fate of your people. We know that every day on Ukrainian soil, people are dying. Innocent civilians, women, children, elderly people, but also soldiers. Soldiers on both sides, not only Ukrainian soldiers, also Russian soldiers. This is why I would like to tell you that with our presence here today, we are sending out a very strong message of our determination to do everything we can to end this war as soon as possible and do everything we can, the 5 of us who are standing here, 4 partners of Ukraine, every contribution we can make and we have to make. This war has been waged by Russia. It has not been provoked. It has not been launched by NATO or the European Union or democracy. This war exclusively was caused by Russia. It is an illegal war of aggression. Today, Germany, France, Poland, and the United Kingdom and Ukraine met, and we have prepared that meeting well. We all spoke to the American president before our meeting, and immediately after our meeting today, we informed him personally. We are grateful to the American president that he fully supports our initiative, he shares our initiative, and he is engaged in this initiative with us. We are all working towards Russia to finally agree to a longer ceasefire instead of coming up with new preconditions again and again. With President Zelenskyy, we discussed today what the next steps can look like towards the war, the path towards real peace. The next step needs to go beyond the ceasefire of this weekend, a 30-day ceasefire starting on Monday next week, without conditions, that is fully respected by Russia, without conditions. And it needs to be clear, if Russia denies this ceasefire, that would be the basis for negotiations that could start immediately, we will continue to defend Ukraine and we will continue to ratchet up pressure on Russia. This, too, is part of this day. Almost all members of the European Union and a big coalition of the willing across the globe is determined to impose these sanctions if our initiative of this weekend were to fail. This initiative is an initiative we take because of our common responsibility, our common history, and I would like to reiterate it once again. It's not only an honor, it is an obligation for Germany and the new federal government, as it was perceived by the former government also. It is a privilege to be here to support every initiative to make sure that this war in Europe, it is taking place in Europe, that this war in Europe ends as soon as possible. We have an opportunity to do that, and if that war ends, we, together with Ukraine, with NATO, with the European Union, will make sure this peace lasts so that Ukraine can prosper in freedom, in security, and in a democracy. Thank you very much.
Statement by Prime Minister of the Republic of Poland, Donald Tusk. For me, as the Polish Prime Minister, dear friend, this opportunity of having a meeting here in Kyiv, 80 years after the end of the Second World War, is of extreme great importance. Poland, since the first hours of Russia's aggression against Ukraine, has been supporting the Ukrainian people, the Ukrainian nation, President Zelenskyy, with everything it has. We are the nations that have a constant memory of huge victims that we had sustained during the time of the Second World War. We also remember that the victory over the fascist Germany did not bring freedom neither to the Poles nor the Ukrainians. We were waiting for true independence and freedom for many years. We are ready to fight for the freedom and independence. Ukraine today is paying the highest price, the blood price, fighting for the same values of independence and freedom. But Ukraine is not alone today. This is an exceptional symbolism, what has happened in these 2 days. Yesterday, they had the parade of shame organized by the aggressor in Moscow. And brutal words full of aggression and hatred were said there. A day later, there's a meeting in Kyiv. The meeting of us four with President Zelenskyy. The meeting that results in the call for peace, for an immediate, since coming Monday, unconditional ceasefire. The meeting that takes place in Kyiv, that has been bombarded, ruined, attacked by the aggressor. It is from here where the words about the need to stop firing, to launch negotiations as soon as possible, to reach a long and lasting and just peace come from. These are the words that the whole free world has taken close to its heart. This is the day that has not just a symbolic value. This is the day when a very important event took place. The idea of ceasefire and immediate negotiations has been a joint one, voiced by the President of the United States of America, the President of Ukraine, German, UK, and Polish leaders present here, all done to support Ukraine in its fight for freedom and independence. It is the first time that since long the whole free world has been united around the decision we adopted. The whole world, starting in New Zealand, ending in Canada, Iceland, the US, Norway, the whole of Europe, we've all have been speaking with one voice. And this isn't a naive voice. We fully understand that we are facing a true test. Same can be said of Russia and its Putin. We will be waiting for Russia's reaction. What we are surely of is that the proposal that we coined together by the US, Europe, Canada, Ukraine, regarding the ceasefire, regarding the truce, is a serious one. If Russia refuses this proposal, no one will have any more doubts as to who stands for peace and who stands for war. President Zelenskyy and Ukraine's readiness to launch negotiations is truly a no small gesture. We do not know whether the aggressor will value that, but we all will remember it. We will.
Through our various press briefings.
Okay, and we've just been listening to the leaders of Ukraine, President Zelenskyy of Ukraine, as well as the leaders of Poland, the UK, France and Germany. And to discuss that further, I've got DW's chief political editor, Michaela Küfner, here in studio. Michaela, they were essentially reiterating their support for Ukraine. And this comes at a crucial time, particularly as we've seen the US being a bit softer, even friendlier, we would say, to Russia. So how important is this for Ukraine?
It's very important. So let's go through what they've just announced first. Essentially, European leaders standing alongside Ukraine's President Volodymyr Zelenskyy and with the backing of the USA, particularly Donald Trump, which they keep stressing, they are now demanding that Russia agree to an unconditional 30-day ceasefire. We heard Keir Starmer remind Vladimir Putin, who I'm sure was listening here, that he didn't need any preconditions for the brief ceasefire we just saw to, and I quote, or I paraphrase, to hold military parades, following, of course, that 80-year commemoration of the end of the Second World War. And hence the logic here is that Russia should agree to an unconditional 30-day ceasefire, which so far it is not willing to do. We heard pushback there also from Putin's spokesman Peskov, even during the course of the day today. It is absolutely key that although from the photograph it appears to have just been on a mobile phone, that this has the backing of the United States. All leaders were speaking in this press conference, and we did hear also from Germany's freshly elected Chancellor Friedrich Merz, who said that European allies, together with Volodymyr Zelenskyy, would amp up the pressure on Russia unless it agrees to this. So this is a clear attempt to change the dynamics, also to make clear that the Russian narrative is plainly wrong. And we also heard Friedrich Merz here make absolutely clear that there's only one aggressor, that this war, this aggression violates international law. So it will be very interesting to hear how the Kremlin eventually reacts. And we do expect, of course, Vladimir Putin to hold a speech this evening. So this will be very interesting indeed.
OK. I believe we can turn to Kyiv right now. We've got DW's Nick Connolly, a correspondent there, who's joining us. Are we able to speak to Nick? Nick, can you give us your view from Kyiv? You were actually at the meeting with those where the leaders were speaking.
Definitely. I think this is all about making Russia's President Vladimir Putin blink. This is about saying, if you do not agree to this now, with no ifs or buts, as Keir Starmer put it, then you are responsible for this war continuing. There is no space for delaying or for coming up with any kinds of complications. This is clear about, do you want peace or do you want to carry on fighting? And if you do want to carry on fighting, then there will be more sanctions and more in the way of military aid for Ukraine. Obviously, lots of analysts there would say military aid for Ukraine is more significant than sanctions, given how many sanctions Russia is already under. But there was a very harmonized message there. Basically, those four leaders saying the same thing over and over, and also at pains to repeat quite how clearly and how closely this had been coordinated with Donald Trump, desperate to keep the Americans in the game and make sure this is not about the Europeans doing something on their own. This is about keeping Donald Trump interested and involved, and also hoping, I guess, for American support in the future in any kind of peace that happens after a ceasefire.
Nick, this would be exactly what Volodymyr Zelenskyy would have been looking for, right?
I think it is very close. It is something that, we have, been hearing from the Ukrainians. Stop fighting and then we'll discuss the rest. We'd seen the Russians definitely saying first Ukraine potentially would have to agree to sign away large swathes of its territory to Russia, or that Ukraine would maybe have to end its mobilization and basically stop building up its military forces. So that is all not in there. It's obviously not the same as saying we are immediately willing to offer things like Taurus missiles from Germany. That's something that the Ukrainians have been wanting for a long time. Or we'd heard, calls for kind of peacekeepers, boots on the ground to make sure that any kind of ceasefire actually holds. We saw the European leaders there avoiding direct answers, saying that is not the time right now to talk about these things. That is something that will come after 30 days of ceasefire actually materialize. But certainly there was a sense that they were all talking off the same page and that they were working together.
Just coming to you, Michaela. We mentioned Friedrich Merz there. What was his role in particular in all this?
Well, Germany is Europe's largest economy. Germany right now is Ukraine's second largest supporter, both in terms of military equipment, but also in financial terms. And most importantly, this is a chancellor who has money he can spend, decisions he can make, because former Chancellor Olaf Scholz was essentially a lame duck over the past couple of months, those key months, also with Donald Trump coming into office. So Germany was pretty much out of the picture. And it did show that he was a bit the new kid on the block. He is showing his decisiveness for Germany to take more of a leading role. But then he said that the European partners would be willing to do whatever it takes to end this war. And then he went on to qualify it that as they stand here, they would do whatever they need to do and what they can do. So it's the whatever it takes message that the Ukrainians have been waiting for from day one. They didn't get it here either, although it sounded like it for a short moment. So clearly he is learning to be a lot more careful with his words than he was while he was still the opposition leader and the Chancellor designate.
OK. We'll come back to you in a sec, Michaela, but back to Nick in Kyiv. Nick, what would you say is the big takeaway for Ukraine from today's events?
Well, I think the big takeaway is that it seems like the European leaders have been able to basically get Trump back on board and also get Trump listening to what they're doing. That is, the big takeaway, that they are obviously the countries that are expected to then provide peacekeepers or some kind of, more kind of long-term support for Ukraine to make sure that any peace holds. But they have seemingly found a way also of coaching, President Zelenskyy also to say the kinds of things that are going to go down well with Donald Trump, with that White House team, after obviously those disastrous scenes in the Oval Office a couple of months ago. And this is also about, I guess, taking initiative, right? This is not waiting for Russia to agree or to, offer a couple of days of ceasefire. This is about saying, you say you want peace. This is what we're offering. No ifs, no buts, no conditions. Do it from Monday, or show to the world that you are not seriously interested in peace. Most people here in Ukraine are very skeptical that Vladimir Putin is anywhere near being willing to stop his army on the battlefields here in Ukraine. But there is some hope that at least the outside world might then be convinced of Ukraine's point of view if they see Russia refusing this kind of ceasefire.
And of course, we've seen, just summing it up again, this focus on the 30-day ceasefire. As you mentioned, Michaela, there was this insistence on Putin being the aggressor. We saw the reiteration of support for Ukraine. Where do we go from here? We've seen Russia, obviously, has been a bit hostile when it comes to seeing the kind of support that Ukraine is getting from these partners. Will today's meeting have done something in terms of possibly bringing forward this 30-day ceasefire?
Well, what is important, and the symbolism is important, we've actually seen Europe take a lead here and have a common voice. And I didn't count how many times Keir Starmer, the British Prime Minister alone, mentioned the word united. But this is a united European voice. It is the United States, Donald Trump, on board for this moment. Let's enjoy this moment as Europeans, particularly after we heard him be very unclear when J.D. Vance was muttering kind of the US Vice President was almost criticizing Vladimir Putin of not really moving enough on this issue of a ceasefire. He got instant pushback from US President Donald Trump. So this really is a major thing that at this moment the Western allies of Ukraine are standing together and putting up a united vocal front towards Vladimir Putin. This is no longer a given, particularly having the United States on board. And Putin cannot ignore this. He cannot talk it down. And if he doesn't agree to an unconditional ceasefire, he's the one who wanted a continuation of war. And it proves wrong the narrative he's been trying to spin, that it's the Ukrainians who don't really want peace. So it's a big window of opportunity. And now the ball is clearly in the court of Vladimir Putin. And everything will depend on his reaction. And the hope here in amongst these European allies is that even Donald Trump cannot afford to just let it go if Vladimir Putin doesn't accept this.
Okay, we'll be watching to see how that all unfolds. But thank you very much, DW's Chief Political Editor, Michaela Küfner, here in studio, and Nick Connolly, our correspondent in Kyiv. Thank you, Nick.